Some stories don't start when things fall apart. Some start years earlier, quietly, in moments you never saw, never questioned, never imagined could come back to destroy everything you built. My story didn't begin the day I found the truth. It began a decade before that, in a night I didn't know existed. A night she shared with someone she once loved, someone she swore was out of her life by the time she chose me. For 10 years, I lived in what I believed was trust. A decade of routines, plans, small joys, shared mornings, holidays, arguments, reconciliations, everything that defines a marriage. And underneath it all, hidden like a crack under wallpaper, lived a secret she hoped would never see daylight. I didn't know betrayal could travel through time. I didn't know a moment from 10 years ago could reach so far into the present and fracture a life that had already survived so much. But it did. And the worst part isn't discovering the betrayal. It's realizing it had been woven into every year that followed, sitting silently beside me through anniversaries, birthdays, conversations about the future, and moments I thought were pure. Looking back now, I understand one thing. The truth doesn't disappear just because it is buried. It waits. It waited 10 years for me. Before everything shattered, our life looked steady. Normal in the way long relationships become. We had routines, the kind you don't notice forming until they're suddenly gone. Saturday mornings with coffee and quiet music. Evening walks when the weather allowed. Arguments that never lasted more than a few hours. A rhythm that felt safe. I trusted her completely, not passively, fully. I never questioned her past, never dug for details she didn't want to share. I believed that when she chose me, she closed the chapter with her ex. For years, nothing gave me a reason to think otherwise. There were no odd behaviors, no suspicious messages, no unexplained absences. Our connection felt genuine. Our loyalty felt mutual. I used to think the most painful betrayals came from years of lying or ongoing affairs. I never considered that the most devastating one could be a single event, a moment she kept locked away because she didn't want to lose me. But secrets don't protect relationships. They poison them from the inside. And even if I didn't see the poison for 10 years, I felt it the moment the truth surfaced. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind where nothing seems out of place. I wasn't searching for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't even thinking about the past. But life has a cruel way of choosing its timing. I stumbled across a message thread she had archived years ago. Old conversations she probably forgot still existed. There was nothing graphic, nothing explicit, just words, soft, nostalgic words that didn't belong to a woman preparing to marry someone else. I wasn't angry at first. I was confused, then unsettled, then cold, the kind of cold that starts in your chest and spreads through your body like frost. A few more small details surfaced, each one aligning into a picture I didn't want to see. A date, a timeline, a hint in her phrasing. And then the truth hit me with brutal clarity. While I was planning our future, she had gone back to her past. Just once. Just before the wedding. Just enough to destroy everything 10 years later. I remember sitting in the living room afterward, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of a decade settle on me in a way I'd never felt before. Not because of what she did, but because she chose to hide it. A secret that long becomes part of the foundation. And when the foundation cracks, the whole structure follows. For days after discovering the truth, I walked around in a fog. She didn't know that I knew. I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet, not because I feared her reaction, but because I feared what the truth would do to the life we had built. I looked at her differently, not with anger, not with hatred, but with a distance I couldn't control. I watched her laugh at something on her phone. I watched her move through the house with the comfort of someone who believed she had earned this peace. I watched her fall asleep beside me like everything was normal, and I felt like a ghost in my own home. Every time she smiled at me, I felt the weight of the lie behind it. Every time she touched my hand, I remembered she touched someone else before she walked down the aisle. Every time she said she loved me, I wondered how those words sounded the night before she stepped into our marriage carrying a secret I never agreed to hold. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger requires energy. I had none. I felt betrayed in a way I had never experienced. Not because she loved someone else, not because she wanted him, but because she let me build a life on ground she knew wasn't solid. She chose my ignorance over my dignity. And that choice stayed in the room with us, even when she was unaware. As the days passed, the truth didn't fade. It grew. It stretched across 10 years of memories, coloring everything with a shade of doubt I couldn't ignore. A decade of trust felt suddenly fragile. Anniversaries, vacations, arguments and apologies, moments of tenderness, moments of difficulty. All of it felt like it belonged to a story built on a lie. She acted normal, painfully normal. She made dinner. She made plans. She talked about work. She asked about my day. And I sat across from her, knowing something she didn't know I knew. Something that changed the meaning of every word she said. The past doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits until the moment you least expect it. It waited 10 years to show me who I married. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want answers. I didn't want to hear excuses. I wanted the truth that was stolen from me. I wanted the choice she took away the moment she hid what she had done. Marriage is built on honesty. Ours had been built on omission. And omission becomes a betrayal long before it becomes a confession. One night, about a week after discovering everything, she fell asleep beside me. Peaceful, unaware, breathing evenly. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling the divide between us like a canyon. It wasn't the betrayal itself that created that distance. It was the years she let me live in a narrative that wasn't true. The years she looked me in the eyes knowing she had erased a piece of the story before handing it to me. Forgiveness is possible when the truth comes early, when the wound is fresh, when the pain is clean. But forgiving something that lived in the walls of your marriage for a decade feels like trying to rebuild a house while it's already collapsing. I realized then, in the quiet darkness, that I wasn't angry at her for what she did with her ex. I was angry for the 10 years she allowed me to believe in a version of us she knew wasn't real. And once that understanding settled inside me, something else followed. A deep, final certainty. This marriage was over. Not because of the night she spent with someone else, but because of every day that followed. Every day she let me love her under a roof she knew wasn't steady. Every day she stayed silent when she should have given me the truth. Every day she allowed me to trust her without earning that trust. The betrayal wasn't 10 years old. It was ongoing, and I couldn't live with that. In the days after the discovery, my life split into two timelines. There was the timeline I lived on the outside, the predictable rhythm of work, chores, conversations, routines. And then there was the timeline running quietly underneath, where everything felt uncertain, fractured, and painfully real. The world around me stayed the same, but my place inside it shifted. I wasn't the husband I used to be, the man who trusted without hesitation, the man who never second-guessed her affection. I was someone else now, someone who carried a truth he couldn't unlearn. Every morning, she woke beside me unaware that a decade-old wound had reopened overnight. She smiled the same way she always had. She moved through her morning routine, humming softly, making coffee, touching my arm as she passed. And every time her hand brushed my skin, I felt a sensation I had never felt before. Not anger, not disgust, just distance. A distance so wide it didn't matter how close her body was to mine. We were no longer standing in the same place. She didn't do anything wrong in those days. Nothing suspicious, nothing cruel. But that was the problem. She didn't have to. Once trust cracks, it doesn't need fresh damage to keep breaking. The old wound bleeds on its own. As the days passed, I became painfully aware of how much of our life depended on the belief that everything between us had started clean. A relationship built on a lie is like a house with uneven ground. You can decorate it all you want, but eventually the tilt becomes impossible to ignore. I tried to act normal. I tried to mirror her routine, smile when she smiled, talk when she talked. But the weight inside me made every gesture feel hollow. I wasn't pretending for her sake. I was pretending for the memory of the man I used to be. The truth is, I didn't want to confront her yet, because I wasn't ready to see the look on her face when she realized the life she had built with me was already collapsing. I needed time, not to plan revenge, not to gather evidence, but to accept what was happening inside me. This wasn't a moment of anger. It was the slow crumble of a foundation that had carried too much for too long. Memories become dangerous when truth rewrites them. I found myself revisiting moments from the past, not physically, but mentally. Replaying conversations, gestures, decisions, wondering how much of it had been touched by the secret she carried. The night she told me she loved me for the first time. Our engagement, our honeymoon, the early years when everything felt pure. I looked at those moments differently now. Not because they were fake, but because they were incomplete. Incomplete in a way that made me feel like I had been walking blindfolded through my own life. The strange how one hidden moment can contaminate 10 years of history. One mistake, buried, denied, forgotten by one person, becomes a quiet echo that eventually reaches the ears of the other. She had spent a decade convincing herself it didn't matter, that it was a lapse, a mistake, a moment of confusion before committing wholeheartedly to me. But that version of the story only works when the truth stays buried. Once it surfaced, the narrative she built collapsed, and I was left staring at a decade of memories that no longer felt like mine. Every time we had argued and she swore she was honest with me. Every time we celebrated an anniversary. Every time I looked at her and felt grateful for choosing me. All those moments dimmed under the shadow of the truth she kept from me. I wasn't angry at the betrayal itself. People make mistakes. People get confused. People sometimes fall back into old emotions before moving forward. But mistakes require honesty to heal. Without honesty, they grow teeth. Her mistake had been buried for 10 years. And in that time, it had grown claws sharp enough to tear through everything we built. As the days passed, she continued acting with the calm confidence of someone who believed her life was exactly as it should be. She made plans for the weekend. She talked about vacations. She mentioned ideas for the future. She leaned into me on the couch, unaware that the space between us had grown beyond anything physical. Her normalcy made everything worse. She had lived comfortably with this secret for a decade. She had built her peace on top of my unknowing. And I was only now discovering the debt she left for me to carry. Sometimes she would smile at me with sincerity, and that sincerity cut deeper than any argument ever could. It meant she had convinced herself the past didn't matter. But convincing herself didn't erase the truth that she took from me. Trust isn't just about fidelity. It's about allowing the other person the chance to choose you with full knowledge of who you are and what you've done. She took that choice away from me, and every day she moved through our life as if nothing had ever happened. I felt more like a stranger standing in a home he no longer recognized. Eventually, the distance inside me began to show in small ways. Not because I wanted it to, but because I couldn't contain the heaviness anymore. I became quieter, more withdrawn, less available emotionally. She noticed, not immediately but gradually. She asked fewer questions, watched me from the corner of her eye a little more often, seemed confused when I didn't respond with the same warmth. She thought it was stress, maybe work, maybe exhaustion. She had no idea it was her. There was a moment one evening when she sat beside me on the couch and leaned her head on my shoulder. A gesture that used to feel intimate, comforting, grounding, but this time it felt wrong. Not because of her weight or her warmth, but because the trust that made that gesture meaningful had been shattered days earlier. I sat there frozen, aware that the woman resting against me wasn't the woman I thought she was. Or maybe she was, and I just never knew the full story. In that moment, I realized something painful and undeniable. I could never love her the same way again. Not even if she cried. Not even if she explained. Not even if she begged. I could never unknow what I now knew. I could forgive a mistake, but not a decade-long silence. As the emotional distance grew, so did my clarity. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. Not signs of cheating, but signs of guilt she had buried so deeply she no longer recognized it in herself. She avoided talking about the past. She changed the subject when anything about her ex came up, even indirectly. She often said she was grateful for how solid our marriage was, but there was always a nervous edge to those moments. I didn't see those signs as guilt before. Now I understood everything. She had built a life with me while carrying a truth she prayed would stay buried. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And when they surface, they don't just break trust. They expose the weakness of everything built on top of them. The more I watched her live her calm life, the more I realized she wasn't the woman who betrayed me. She was the woman who lied to me for 10 years. Those are not the same thing. Betrayal is a moment. Silence is a choice. A choice she made every day for a decade. The night I realized that, I knew I couldn't stay. Not because of the moment she shared with her ex, but because of the years she spent pretending it never happened. Our marriage wasn't built on trust. It was built on her fear of losing me and my ignorance of the truth. And no matter how much love there had been, I couldn't keep living in a story that was missing a chapter she intentionally tore out. The decision wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't fueled by anger. It was quiet, final, inevitable. I knew that if I stayed, I would become a bitter man, replaying the past over and over, searching for ways to forgive something that was unforgivable not because of the act, but because of the time that followed. I wasn't going to live the rest of my life with a ghost sitting between us. The ending had already begun, and all that remained was to face it. There's a strange calm that settles over your life when you finally accept a truth you spent years unknowingly living beside. Not peace. Peace comes much later, but a quiet shift, like the moment after a glass shatters and you stand staring at the pieces, no longer shocked, just deciding how to step around them without cutting yourself. That was me during those days, living in a house that still held her things, her voice, her scent, but no longer held the version of her I thought I married. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even confused anymore. I was simply done. Not suddenly, not violently, but in the slow, deliberate way a person gets up from a chair after sitting for too long, realizing the stiffness isn't going away until he moves. The truth had lived inside our marriage for 10 years, and once I found it, everything that came before looked different. And everything that came after felt impossible. I couldn't look at her without seeing the younger version of her, the one who made a choice, hid it, and then built a life on top of that silence. I couldn't hear her laugh without wondering who she was thinking about in the months before the wedding. I couldn't sit beside her without feeling like a man living inside a story missing its most important page. My love for her didn't disappear overnight, but my ability to stay did. She moved through our home with the confidence of someone who believed the foundation was solid. I moved through it like someone who felt every crack beneath his feet. I noticed everything now. The small gestures she thought were comforting. The routines she assumed made us close. The way she leaned into me on the couch, unaware that the version of me she thought she knew no longer existed. When she talked about the future, I didn't picture myself in it. When she mentioned plans, I didn't feel included. When she laughed at something on her phone, I didn't feel connected. One night, she sat beside me with her legs tucked under a blanket and her head resting gently on my shoulder. For years, that feeling had meant comfort, safety, partnership. But now, it felt like a borrowed gesture from a marriage I was no longer part of. A habit from a life that had already ended for me. Her presence wasn't wrong. It just no longer belonged to the same emotional space. I didn't pull away. I didn't stiffen. I didn't give her any signal that something was wrong. But inside, a quiet voice whispered the truth. We were no longer a team. We hadn't been for years, I just didn't know it. It's strange how betrayal that happened long ago can feel fresh once discovered. Like a scar you didn't know you had suddenly starts bleeding. I kept thinking about the day we got married. Not the ceremony, not the vows, but the morning before it. I remembered pacing nervously, adjusting my tie, imagining our future, believing I knew who I was building that future with. Meanwhile, she was carrying something I didn't know, something she had decided I didn't deserve to hear. The weight of that realization sank deeper with every passing day. How do you stay with someone who crafted your marriage on a half-truth? How do you sleep beside someone who chose to hide something that would have changed your whole story? How do you trust again once the timeline you believed in collapses? I couldn't answer any of those questions. and the silence that followed them became louder each day. Even harmless things became reminders. A photo from years ago, a phone notification she didn't notice, a comment she made about honesty in relationships, a TV scene where a character apologized for something they hid. Little moments became sharp edges, and every sharp edge cut the same scar. Sometimes, I watched her cook and wondered if she ever thought about telling me. Sometimes, I watched her brush her hair before bed and wondered how she looked at herself in the mirror all those years. Sometimes, I watched her move around the house, comfortable and confident, and wondered if guilt had ever touched her. If it did, she hid it well. Maybe she convinced herself it didn't matter. Maybe she convinced herself she had changed. Maybe she convinced herself the truth was too small to risk losing me. But she didn't get to decide what truth I could live with. That's what betrayal really is. A stolen choice. I didn't confront her right away. Not out of fear, out of certainty. There are conversations you don't start unless you're ready for the ending that follows. I needed to reach the point where I wasn't reacting emotionally, where I wasn't drowning in shock or hurt, where I wasn't begging for explanations. I wanted to meet the truth calmly, with both feet on solid ground, with a steady voice and a steady mind. She didn't know any of this was happening inside me. She kept moving through the days with a soft ease that would have hurt more if I were still in love the way I used to be. But love changes, and sometimes it breaks in silence, long before anyone says a word. I started sleeping worse, started staying up late, sitting at the kitchen table staring at the darkness outside the window. Not because I was lost, but because I was preparing to end something I had spent 10 years believing in. Preparing to step out of a life she built on unfinished truth. Preparing to choose myself after a decade of being kept in the dark. The man who discovered the truth was not the same man who married her. And that man deserved clarity and self-respect, not secrets buried under years of routine. There was one moment, one small, simple moment, when everything inside me aligned. She walked into the living room, hair tied loosely, wearing an oversized sweatshirt, the kind she usually wore when she wanted comfort. She sat next to me on the couch with a warm familiarity, tucked her feet under a blanket, and leaned her head gently against my arm. A gesture she'd made 1,000 times. A gesture that used to feel like home. But this time, something inside me stayed still. Completely still. No warmth. No affection. No connection. Just distance, quiet, final distance. Her head rested on my arm, but it felt like she was miles away. Not because the gesture changed, but because its meaning had. And in that moment, I knew with complete clarity. There was no version of the future where we recovered. No version where I could look at her the same way again. No version where trust could be rebuilt. No version where her past didn't stand between us every single day. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is choosing to stay despite the wound. I realized I had no desire to stay. Not because I hated her. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I needed her to suffer. But because the part of me that once saw her as a partner was gone. That night, I lay awake long after she fell asleep. She breathed softly beside me, unaware that the man lying next to her had already stepped out of the marriage emotionally. I stared at the ceiling in the darkness and felt something quiet, something heavy, something final settle into place. I wasn't her husband anymore. Not in my heart. Not in my mind. Not in the life I saw unfolding ahead of me. The only thing left was to say it out loud. And endings spoken out loud are the ones that finally set you free. The morning I finally decided to end the marriage didn't feel dramatic or heavy. It felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight through the curtains, quiet air in the house, the soft hum of appliances in the kitchen. A regular day in every way except one. I no longer felt like a man living with his wife. I felt like a man preparing to walk away from the ghost of a decade. People imagine endings as storms. Shouting, tears, doors slamming, shattered plates, emotional explosions. But most endings come quietly. They don't roar. They settle, like dust after a long collapse. I woke up before she did. Not intentionally. My body simply didn't want to stay beside someone who no longer belonged in my life. I looked at her for a moment, not with resentment or grief, but with a strange calm. Not the calm of forgiveness, and not the calm of love. The calm of finally seeing the truth without fear. The woman sleeping next to me was not the woman I thought she was. Or maybe she was, and I had simply lived too long with the version I preferred to believe in. I walked out of the bedroom quietly, as if leaving a room filled with memories I no longer wished to carry. The house felt different. Familiar but distant, like a place I had already moved out of mentally. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, hands clasped, listening to the quiet. There was no panic, no rush, just a deep understanding that the rest of my life couldn't begin until I let go of this one. I wasn't choosing anger. I wasn't choosing blame. I was choosing myself, maybe for the first time since the day I married her. When she entered the kitchen later that morning, wrapped in a warm robe, hair loosely tied, she looked like the woman I had shared 1,000 mornings with. But that connection was gone for me. The familiarity of her presence meant nothing now. It was only habit, hers and mine. She moved around the kitchen with the casual rhythm of someone who believed life was steady. She had no idea the air had already changed. She had no idea I had spent the night accepting a truth she hoped I'd never discover. She had no idea that the marriage she thought she was waking into no longer existed. Watching her prepare breakfast, still humming softly, still unaware, I felt the final clarity settle in. Some wounds aren't meant to be fixed. Some truths aren't meant to be forgiven. Some betrayals aren't measured by the act, but by the years someone hid it. I didn't feel the need to accuse her, or interrogate her, or pull confessions from her. The truth was already complete, with or without her explanation. I wasn't staying because the man I was becoming wouldn't survive another day living in a story built on silence. Leaving wasn't a punishment. It was a release. For both of us, though she didn't know it yet. I spent that afternoon in the bedroom, methodically pulling my clothes from drawers, stacking them, folding them. Not rushed, calm, deliberate, like packing a life that had already ended. It was unsettling how easy it was. How natural it felt to place my belongings into a suitcase without the weight of hesitation. When a marriage dies, its possessions stop feeling tied to any emotional value. What once symbolized partnership now felt like items on shelves. Nothing more, nothing less. I moved through the house, gathering the pieces of myself I had scattered over 10 years. Books I bought, gifts I received, clothes she never wore, objects that once had meaning but now felt strangely neutral. Every step felt like reclaiming something I had lost long before I found the truth. Myself. There is something liberating about packing when you know you're not running away from someone. You're walking back toward the person you were supposed to be. When the last box closed, the house felt different. Lighter. Honest. Not because I was leaving, but because the truth finally had space to breathe. By the time she realized something was wrong, the damage had already been repaired. Inside me, not between us. She saw the packed suitcase. She saw the boxes near the door. She saw the quiet finality in my posture. Her face shifted from confusion to fear to silence. A silence thicker than anything we had ever shared. She didn't ask the question out loud, but her eyes asked everything, and mine answered everything in return. Some endings don't need long explanations. Some truths don't require arguments. Sometimes two people simply understand that they have reached a point where one can no longer stay without breaking. She felt the truth in the air, the truth I carried for days while she lived in comfort. She sensed that the man standing in front of her was no longer the man she lied to 10 years ago. He was someone else now, someone she could no longer reach. There were no tears from me. There were no raised voices, no accusations, no pleading, just acceptance. Acceptance that the marriage had been cracked for a decade. Acceptance that she had tried to bury that crack instead of fixing it. Acceptance that the truth had finally risen to the surface, refusing to stay quiet any longer. She didn't try to stop me. Maybe she knew she couldn't. Maybe she understood that the moment she hid the truth 10 years ago, she had already lost me. She just didn't know when the loss would arrive. It arrived today. I walked out of the house without rushing, without shaking, without looking back. The air outside felt different, vivid, sharp, real. It felt like the first honest breath I'd taken in years. I placed my suitcase in the car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the steering wheel for a moment. Not grieving, not regretting, just settling into the reality that my life was beginning again. Not because she broke it, but because her silence freed me from a story that never truly belonged to me. When I drove away, I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel incomplete. I felt whole in a way I hadn't felt since before she carried that secret into our marriage. Some people believe healing starts after leaving. For me, healing started the moment I chose to leave. The divorce process was cleaner than I expected. Simple, quiet, 2 signatures, a few appointments, some polite exchanges that felt more like business than heartbreak. She didn't fight it. She didn't argue. She didn't cling. Maybe guilt made it easier for her. Maybe acceptance had settled into her as well. Maybe she understood that trying to fix something she broke a decade ago was pointless now. When the final papers arrived, I held them for a moment, letting the weight of the past decade settle into that thin stack of legal text. It didn't hurt. It didn't sting. It felt like closure, real closure, the kind you don't have to force or fake. I signed my name one last time and felt a quiet peace run through my chest. The chapter was officially over. Not tragic. Not bitter. Just done. I moved into a small apartment across town. Simple. Quiet. Mine. No shadows from the past. No ghosts of secrets. No timeline built on half-truths. It felt like breathing clean air after years of living in a room with closed windows. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself rediscovering small joys. Cooking for one, late-night walks, waking up without tension, being alone without feeling lonely. I wasn't healing from the betrayal. I was healing from the decade of not knowing. There's a difference. Every day that passed, I felt a little lighter, a little clearer, a little more like the version of myself I lost when I built a life on a truth I didn't have the chance to choose. The betrayal didn't break me. It revealed me. It showed me who I was without her. It showed me who I could become without the weight of a lie over my shoulders. It showed me that endings, even painful ones, are sometimes the most honest beginnings. I didn't lose a marriage. I lost an illusion, and what I gained was worth far more. A life I could finally live with clarity, dignity, and peace. For the first time in 10 years, I belonged entirely to myself. And that was enough.